Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Our webinar this month is going to be an overview of accreditation in the cannabis industry. My name's Melanie Ross, and I'm going to be the facilitator for the webinar today. We have a panel of presenters today that we are going to have a discussion with after. So the way this webinar is going to work is I'm going to give a high-level overview of some of the accreditation types that ANAB offers in the cannabis industry. And then we're going to open it up to questions to our panelists, any questions you may have, as well as some questions that we've prepared ahead of time. Please note, we are recording this webinar, so it will be available for future viewing on the ANAB website. Just a few things before I introduce our panel. All attendees are muted. If you have questions during the webinar, please submit those via the Q&A box within WebEx. We will get to those questions when we get to the Q&A portion of the webinar. Our panel members today involve individuals from ANAB across our strategic business units for credentialing, laboratory accreditation, product certification, and training. For credentialing, we have the Senior Director of Accreditation, Taran Ives, and the Manager of Accreditation, Caitlin O'Connell. For laboratory accreditation, today we have Keith Clem, the Senior Manager of Accreditation. Unfortunately, Chris Fox-Strauss had another obligation, so he won't be joining us today. For product certification, we have Ronaldo Figueiredo, the Vice President of Conformity Assessment Strategy. And for training today, we were going to have David Feist, the Senior Manager of Training Business, but he was also pulled away for a different meeting with Chris Fox-Strauss, so I will be talking about our training program today. As you can see, we have representation across the organization to discuss why accreditation is important in the cannabis industry, as well as go over some of the challenges that organizations may have in obtaining accreditation. So there are a lot of different types of accreditation that can be obtained in the cannabis industry, and types of accreditation that are offered are obviously for laboratory testing. This is one of the largest areas for accreditation, and we'll get into the specifics of that here in a minute. But we're also seeing accreditation come up in product and process certification, as well as in training certificate programs or credentialing of individuals that are working in the cannabis industry. We've seen some movement in the dietary supplement industry as well, and there's also accreditation for those proficiency test providers that provide the proficiency testing to the laboratories that are testing the products, as well as reference material producers. And then there's also an abundance of training courses, which ANAB also has for specifically the cannabis industry. Just a high-level overview of accreditation for the testing laboratories. It's based on the standard ISO/IEC 17025 for testing and calibration laboratories. The accreditation is typically for the analytical testing of cannabis and cannabis-derived products. This accreditation demonstrates that products are safe for consumption and free from harmful levels of contaminants. I said accreditation and I meant testing. So the testing demonstrates that the products are safe for consumption. Typical tests that we see on the accreditation scope for testing laboratories are for cannabinoid testing, potency and content, terpene profile, pesticides and mycotoxins, microbiological contamination, heavy metals, and residual solvents. Accreditation for laboratories that perform analytical testing of cannabis and cannabis-derived products demonstrates that they meet specified requirements. They have a management system and they have the technical expertise in order to perform the tests on their scope of accreditation. A lot of state regulations have the requirement for accreditation in their regulations for labs testing cannabis products. When we look at those proficiency test providers, that's the standard ISO/IEC 17043, and it's based on proficiency test schemes. These schemes dictate what the products are going to be and what the parameters are going to be for those products that are sent to the laboratories for them to perform the proficiency testing. Reference material producers can be accredited to 17034, and they can provide reference materials and certified reference materials to laboratories that are performing testing. These materials can then be used to validate and verify the processes and the equipment that's being used in the laboratory. The use of reference materials and certified reference materials ensures quality of the testing that's being performed. And accreditation allows the reference material producer to demonstrate their competence by complying with international criteria of the standard. For those who use the reference materials, such as testing laboratories, accreditation provides assurance of the quality of the reference materials produced, according to specific technical and management system requirements. Accreditation provides an added level of confidence and assurance that international guidelines are followed in the production, labeling, and assignment of property values to the materials. This includes stability and homogeneity as well. In addition to providing assurance of technical competence, a good quality management practices, accreditation involves verification of critical production management of the reference material producer. While the standard specifies general requirements for reference material operations, specific levels of accuracy are required as well. Reference material producers can be accredited for a wide variety of materials used for critical measurements and measurable properties, but in this case, we're discussing the accreditation for reference material producers that provide products in the cannabis industry. Oftentimes, reference material producers are accredited to both 17034 and 17025. When we look at cannabis certificate accreditation programs, this is specific training and education programs related to cannabis. It is the credentialing of personnel working in the industry. Organizations set standards that are required for specific job roles within the industry, and individuals are trained to those requirements. Then they are provided a certificate demonstrating that they do meet the requirements. With an increased focus on the accreditation of organizations, the cannabis industry has naturally evolved to include the credentialing of personnel working in the industry. Certificate programs in cannabis are growing in number and relevance to the industry. ANAB has a new cannabis certificate accreditation program that's under the certificate accreditation program, and it assesses and recognizes training and education certificate programs within the cannabis and hemp industries. If I go to this next slide, we can see that this cannabis certificate accreditation program is based on a new ASTM standard, which is ASTM D8403. This standard sets standard practices for certificate programs within the cannabis and hemp industries. There may also be additional state requirements for responsible vendor training. When we look at the certification of product, processes, and services, this involves testing, sampling, inspection, or management systems to evaluate the products to a specific requirement. The accreditation program for cannabis provides attestation that the certification bodies are competent to provide certification in this area of cannabis products. The program is developed around the requirements of 17011 and ISO IEC 17065. These are the international standards. These are the international standards developed by the ISO Committee on Conformity Assessment and are used in more than 100 countries. Again, with the exponential growth of the cannabis market and the continued availability of products containing cannabis in the mainstream marketplace, there's an immediate need for safety, conformance, and quality requirements. More and more discussions are being held related to the certification of dispensaries, growers, and facilities involved in the production of cannabis and hemp containing foods and beverages. States are also recognizing audits conducted under schemes recognized by the Global Food Safety Initiative, illustrating that these programs will be used for qualification of facilities in the industry. Getting products certified by competent certification bodies to cannabis scheme requirements combines the applicable international standards for the evaluation of products, processes, or services in the cannabis industry. We're in the development of 2 schemes for product certification in the cannabis industry: Cannabis Safety and Quality and Purity IQ. So you can see here that the certification of products is based on that ISO IEC 17065, which is the international standard for evaluation of products, processes, and services. Dietary supplements is another area that's gaining momentum. For testing laboratories, there is a standard AOAC that can be added to the 17025 accreditation that has requirements related specifically to dietary supplements and pharmaceuticals. Again, when we look at product certification, we can also look at the Global Retail and Manufacturer Alliance certification, or GRMA. Now, when we look at cannabis training courses, there's a lot of different courses out there, but ANAB, as our training institute, we offer free webinars and webcasts, paid self-training, and paid instructor-led, self-paced training, and paid instructor-led online and in-person training. Our online and in-person training we offer as private and open registration, and these trainings are geared towards the cannabis industry. Some of the courses that we offer is an overview of the 17025 standard with a slant for the cannabis testing laboratories, discussing some of the nuances that are different in cannabis testing labs. We also offer a method validation course as a self-paced course as well. And before we get into our panel discussion, I do want to bring up that ANAB has an event coming up soon. May 9th through the 13th of this year, we're having a Cannabis Roundtable panel and training event at the Gaylord Rockies Resort and Convention Center in Aurora, Colorado. You can go to the link listed here on this slide to find more information. But just a general overview, days 1 and 2 are free and open to the public. The first day is going to be a table discussion with the panelists. The full agenda can be seen on our website. Day 2 is going to be an update for the cannabis programs. So think this webinar, but as a full day program talking about the programs that are in development or that have been recently launched. Days 3 through 5, we're offering our ISO 17025 internal auditor training in person at the Convention Center, and that is a paid training that is $950 per person. So now I want to get into our panel discussion and just ask our panelists some of these questions. As you think of other questions, put them into the Q&A. And also, I invite our panelists to introduce themselves and to give a little overview of their own program if I missed something. So the first question that I want to ask is, we saw several different programs that we say are up and coming, or we say exponential growth of the cannabis industry. So one of the questions that we get asked when we're at trade shows is, why is accreditation an important aspect of quality in the cannabis industry? And I will let any panelist that wants to speak unmute and give us your information about why accreditation is important. And Ronaldo, I see that you are unmuted, so if you'd like to go ahead and give us an overview of why you think that is.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. I mean, the importance of the accreditation is that there is a chain of attestation. The chain of attestation, I mean, the standards that is developed by scheme owners or by standards developers that is going to define the characteristics and requirements of cannabis industry. And then there is also in product, process, and service certification, there is what we call certification scheme. In the certification scheme defines the requirements, how that certification program is going to be implemented. For instance, if it's going to have inspection, if it's going to have audit, if it's going to have test of the final process or not, or a combination of all those evaluations. With all these requirements, that it's coming accreditation, because accreditation is the attestation that a conformity assessment body. In this situation that I made the example of a product certification body that's going to use 17065, it's going to use a certification scheme and also the standards. Our accreditation process is going to attest if the certification body has the process in place, if they have competent people, and also if they use testing labs that demonstrate conformance to 17025 or inspection ISO IEC 17020. So this process, it's a demonstration that certification body is competent. The key word here is competences. Not only the people, but also in the process that they have. Those process needs to it's going to be assessed by our assessment team, and those process needs to demonstrate that the process is in accordance with requirements of the certification scheme, the standards, and 17065. So this process is it means that the certification body has the credentials to be able to provide certification for those schemes. That in some situation, the certification body develop the certification scheme, or use a certification scheme that was developed, like Melanie, you mentioned Purity IQ, you mentioned Cannabis Safety and Quality, and we have another certification body as well, that the certification body developed its own certification scheme. In this situation, when the certification body develop its own certification scheme, it's very rarely that the certification body is going to license that process to other CB. But when the certification scheme and the standards are developed by what we call scheme owners, like the two that I already mentioned, that organization is the one that's going to license for certification bodies to use those certification schemes. So I went through the process just to show why its accreditation is important. It's the credential for the CB, for them to be able to the marketing of their process, and also there are some retailers that they require that the certification body, for them to provide any type of third-party certification, the certification body needs to be accredited. So it's, in some situations, the certification body must be accredited. If not, they cannot provide those certification process. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ronaldo. Now, a follow-up question that came in is does this accreditation have any value in Mexico?
We need to when we mention about recognition, we need to divide in two parts. One is regulatory or a mandatory, when a country or a state defines that that specific certification needs to be done by a specific by certification bodies that are accredited. So in this situation, for instance, in Mexico, if the certification program is voluntary certification program, we can the certification body that is accredited by us in the US or in another country, they can provide certification in Mexico. And another point as well is the recognitions that ANAB has, that we have in terms of regional recognition and international recognition. This facilitates also the acceptance of the certifications that are provided by CBs that are accredited by us. Thank you.
All right. I think you kind of covered this question. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in, but how can accreditation assist organizations in complying with regulatory requirements?
Yeah, I can jump in, and also Turan can complement here. In terms of how accreditation, it's going to also cover regulations, because many of those voluntary certification schemes, they also add regulatory requirements, and in our case here in the US, state regulatory requirements. So when we do that assessment on the certification body, on that organization that applied for our accreditation, those requirements is going to be also included. And the main point here, because the CB sometimes they don't know where their client's going to be. And then they have to have a mechanism. They need to have a process in place to show us that when one or more clients apply for a specific state to that their clients in that specific state, and the client needs to demonstrate conformance to the regulation. So the CB needs to have a process in place on how to incorporate those requirements on their audit, on their testing, or in their inspection. Thank you. I think I give an overview on this here.
Yes, you did. So we had a follow-up question come in that said, can an organization apply for both testing accreditation and product certification?
Yeah, the organization can apply for both accreditations, and the importance here is that since ANAB, we have a suite of process of accreditation. Instead of if the organization reach out to us and apply for accreditation for process certification in accordance with 17065 and laboratory in accordance with 17025, we can combine that assessment, because there are some requirements on those standards that they are almost the same, except because one applied for certification and the other one applied for the testing lab. And so we combine that assessment, and it's good for that organization that applied for those two accreditations. So it's possible for our organization to be able to be accredited for more than one of those standards that ANAB used, that were developed by as Melanie mentioned, it's an international standard developed by the CASCO, that's the ISO Committee on Policies on Conformity Assessment.
Thank you. Taran, do you have something you want to add?
Yes, thank you. So my name is Turan Evas. I'm the Senior Director of Credentialing Accreditation, particularly responsible, along with Caitlin O'Connell, the Cannabis Certificate Accreditation Program, CCAP, as we call it, based on ASTM D8403. So I'm just going to touch base all these 4 quadrants here in the angle, from the angle of training, education, certificate programs, and relevant accreditation of that. So basically, as you all know, the cannabis industry is coming along as a new industry, although it may be considered as the old industry, but in terms of the legalization and being present in the current market because of that certain legalization processes, it's kind of a new industry. So if it is a new industry, then there is a workforce needed for that new industry, competent workforce. So that's an important word, because there was no particular official or regular training or educational programs did not exist before. They just last few years, maybe at most a decade, those programs being coming along. And so therefore, there is a huge need for competent workforce for this industry, for the dispensary, the establishments, retail establishments, laboratories, all sorts. Okay, so it means that then how we can assure the competency of the workforce that's gonna work there. So because there were no traditional training educational programs, higher education programs, or industry-based training programs. Now they were like last few years they were establishing those. So in order to make sure the quality of the training is based on industry accepted practices, then accreditation plays a role there. So another important word is industry accepted practices. What it means that whole industry came together and they agreed, they reached a consensus that those are the rules and regulations and certain practices that accepted by everybody. So that's how we call it the definition of a standard. So for example, ASTM DA8403 is an industry accepted practice. Why? Because ASTM, which is a large standard developer organization, invited all the stakeholders, and Caitlin and I were involved in that standard development process. It was more than 1,000 people, involved in that standard committee. So it means that all industry came together and agreed, and one of the standard created is a certificate standard. So that means that when you meet an accreditation requirement, you also meet industry accepted practices, meaning industry regulators, the organizations, associations, all involve stakeholders. So that's why accreditation basically assures that you meet a certain quality on that particular domain, either training or laboratory or product, any type of context area. So the second quadrant, how an accreditation can assist organization complying with regulatory requirements. That's an interesting one. As I said again, this industry is new, so just coming out from this legalization, problem challenge. So now the states saying that, and the government, okay, so now since it's legal, we can make sure that we can establish certain, regulatory requirements that at least we will have to know what is it, how it can be consumed, and in what context it can be consumed. Is it, recreational or medical? And especially if it is medical, then a whole lot of regulatory requirements jump in because of the medical issues, okay? So for that sense, there are certain regulations already put in, and one of them we will name as responsible vendor training, meaning that right now, as we've counted, there are 27 states in the United States requiring a responsible vendor training from the organizations who need to establish a cannabis establishment. It could be a cannabis cafe, cannabis retail establishment, or any type of dispensary. So they say in order to get a license from the state, you must prove that your personnel went through that training called as responsible vendor training, and then our state must approve the quality of the training. Okay, so for example, that is a regulatory requirement right now. So 27 states, like half of the country, right? So how ANAB can play role there? Basically, of course, these requirements were just established last few months, last year, and considering last 2 years, the hell that we went through, that they were not a regular year. So there were some, irregularities how states establish those requirements because of the restrictions of meeting, feedback from the industry. But nevertheless, so for example, Maryland requires by their Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission that if you want to establish a cannabis cafe in the state of Maryland, that your workers will be considered as cannabis handler or cannabis agent. So they must go through a training. We call it food handler, but now they can call it cannabis handler that must be accredited by ANAB. So that's a law in Maryland. Similarly, that other states requiring that, as I mentioned, that they must go through a vendor training. So we are in the process of reaching out those states and some of them reaching us, saying that you don't have to do that approval process yourself. We already established an accreditation program based on an American national standard, ASTM 8403, so we can, be partner. And considering, if you are familiar with ANAB's accreditations, ANAB also an accreditation body for more than a dozen states now for food handler, and also have more than 27 states for food manager certification programs. So those are the state laws that requiring, if you want to work in, let's say, state of California, or Illinois, or Texas, that in order to be employed, you have to get that food handler training, and that training must be accredited by ANAB. So in similar fashion, now we will be doing for the cannabis vendor training programs. So since it is just new, we are in the process of reaching out those states, or some of them reaching us, and kind of having an establishment. Either they pass a state law, which kind of a longer process because it has to go through the subcommittees in the state level, Senate, and etc., or creating a kind of a regulation that requiring that, like similar what Maryland did. So therefore, accreditation help organizations complying in those regulatory requirements, in this case, responsible vendor training, okay? And the third quadrant is accreditation required by state regulations. As I mentioned, if any of you that would like to know more about those, you can reach us out, either myself or Caitlin, that we can let you know. Like there are right now 27 states that requiring cannabis vendor training, okay? So that for training education programs in order to get a license from the state, so you can establish that, retail or cannabis cafe, or however you want to call. And another interesting part is that since there is a medical portion of this cannabis, phenomena, because as we all know that, cannabis can be a, cure or used for certain disease or medical conditions. So then what happens when a doctor prescribes a cannabis product? So now we are getting kind of a hard field because as you know, the medical field is highly regulated, that you cannot write in or prescribe any medication. But as you know, the cannabis industry is not there yet. So therefore, now we are talking about some legal issues. So there is a concept of called legal educational defensibility, meaning that if a person trained well to do certain job or tasks, that providing the competency, that program that provided that competency will be educationally defensible, meaning that the content is based on industrial activity practices, meaning that ASTM D8403, and also the assessment of the training program should be valid and reliable assessment. So accreditation, ANAB's accreditation can provide that ability for a training provider. So therefore, an accredited training provider can say that their training program is educationally defensible. So in case of any incident, let's think of a scenario that a doctor prescribed a cannabis product as a medication, and although there is no wrongdoing in terms of the product, met the specifications, or any equipment that used met the requirements, or no wrongdoing there, but then the investigation, if being prescribed or provided the wrong type of cannabis product, then the question will be about the competency of that person, either cannabis agent or, there are different names in different regions. They call it bud tender or cannabis handler. So how that person is competent to do that job. So that educational defensibility may turn into a legal defensibility. And if there is an, let's say a litigation case in the court of law, then both the organization that hired that individual or organization that trained those individuals may provide ANAB accreditation as a proof of legal defensibility. Of course, I'm not promising to anyone here you're gonna walk out from that day, that courtroom, but you will have a great deal of defending yourself of the or that individual, because we see that many times of that litigation cases when the incident happens, in the lawyers who are looking for whose fault was that. Was it a machine error? Was it a human error? Was it a negligence? Was it a competence issue? So if it is coming to that competence issue, the easiest way of proving the competence of the individual is making sure that individual trained properly, meaning based on industry accepted practices, meaning based on ASTM D84-3. Okay? So how difficult to obtain accreditation? Well, it's not a brain surgery, okay? But you're not gonna do it in a day either. So you have to take ownership of the process, and you can reach us out in each program for certificate program, either myself or Caitlin or Rienaldo or any other program. We have a bunch of training programs, workshops, and also we can provide the whole information about the timeline and how to get accredited for those ANAB specific accreditation programs. Thank you.
We did have a follow-up question come in for you, Tehran. What type of training courses would fall under that accreditation? And is there any guidance on what type of training should be accredited?
Good question. Short answer, we don't know. And that is a good thing, because our accreditation is not prescriptive accreditation, meaning that we don't tell you how to create your training program. We only look at your training program based on if you're prepared based on certain quality aspects, meaning when you're creating the need analysis or the content or curriculum or an exam or test. So we are gonna look how did you develop. Nevertheless, as I mentioned, there are the 27 states requiring vendor training, responsible vendor training. So unfortunately, since this is a new kind of industry, that there is no one particular blueprint of what a vendor training should look like. In the food safety or any other industry, like in food handler program, there is a FDA food code that must be based on. So that program, basically must comply with the FDA food code, so that we can say that. But in vendor training, it's kind of very flexible. However, there are organizations working on this, and there are some states. And also another reason why I'm hesitant to give you a particular, like a blueprint name, because as I'm talking with the states, let's say Colorado versus Nevada or Oregon, some states may put very specific requirements, even duration or what particular content or what a vendor training should include, just a food safety area or kind of dispensary or handling too. But some states maybe just, want to touch base like very, short versions of that. So there is no dictation from ANAB. So that should be based on what that particular state requires. So that basically how it should work is when, let's say, Nevada or Colorado, Oregon requires a vendor training, let's say you want to comply that training, you may get your ANSI ANAB accreditation, and we will consider also the state that you are targeting and whatever the requirements are that there, and we will consider them as we call it, norm reference, normative reference, like a part of the requirements of accreditation. So therefore, you will be able to tell, and we will be able to tell that state, yes, this XYZ training provider met your requirements as well as ASTM DE-8403 based on our assessment and accreditation process. So that's a good thing because accreditation basically is a third-party attestation, right? It's not just you are claiming yourself, you meet the requirement, or your friend or your client, but an unrelated body like an ANAB telling you based on objective assessment, you meet those requirements. So therefore, ANAB can tell to whomever that requiring whether you met those state requirements, either vendor training or laboratory training or whatever, that we can assure those states with our logo and accreditation certificate and everything that your training program met the requirements, whatever the requirements. So we don't care the requirements. It could be different requirements from state to state, but whatever those requirements will be, we will consider them as a normative reference to our accreditation process, and we will also evaluate them. Our assessors will also make sure that you meet those requirements as well. Like, in food safety area, California state law SB 303 says it must be based on 40 questions. Although accreditation requirement does not, prescribe 40 questions, but California law does. So therefore, our accreditation says, assessors, we have to make sure that you also meet the California requirement as well as our accreditation requirement. So therefore, it is quite rigorous process, and that's why many states put the ANAB accreditation as a state requirement or state law there.
We had a kind of a similar question come in, but for testing laboratories. So it's saying, what parameters are the most important for cannabis labs and dispensaries? For example, chemical content or physical properties like weights and measures. If Keith, if you want to weigh in on that one. I'm not sure if you're talking, Keith. We can't hear you. Let me know in the chat if you're not able to unmute. Give it a second. So while we wait on Keith, I'll give you just my understanding of it. I am also an assessor for ANAB as part of my role as an employee of ANAB. And I do assess some of the cannabis labs. And when we talk about most important for the cannabis labs, it's going to be those labs or those parameters that are in the state regulation and that are needed for safety of the product. So most state regulations, if not all, list the required testing for the products, and they list the limits, the testing limits, or the limits of the product, like if it's a contamination, how much of that can be in that product. So the levels that you have to meet with those products. So it's important that the laboratory tests the products, and the laboratory understands the regulatory requirements and incorporates those tests into their testing, their scope of accreditation, and their testing abilities as far as validating and verifying those tests are being performed correctly. And then you talked about dispensaries or the growers. The state regulations may be lacking a specific test that they know is better for the quality of the product. So they may ask the laboratory to perform that test as well. But the baseline that you would want to test is whatever's in your state regulation or whatever is regulating that industry. And if you're in another country and there is no regulation, you want to think about, we already talked about, Tehran talked about a lawsuit for selling a product or something, creating a product. You want to think about the risk involved and what tests need to be performed to ensure that those products are safe. They are what you think they are, and they are what you are telling your customers they are. And that just provides that verification that your products are going to do what you expect them to do, and that they will be quality products and safe whenever people do take them. So it looks like we've lost Keith, so I'll leave that as my answer for that question for now. And if he logs back in, then we will have that as well. If you give me 1 second, I will come up with our next question. So we had another question in the chat that asked, can ANAB certify the cannabis industry in Mexico? And Hernaldo, thank you for responding, said, yes, you can be accredited by ANAB if you are located in EU countries. And then a subsequent question was, does ANAB have certified bilingual auditors or Spanish-speaking certified auditors? I'll let Hernaldo answer that question.
Yeah, we have assessors because our assessment team has two parts. One is more the requirements of the 17065, 17025, 17020 for inspection. And then we have the technical expert. And we have many technical experts that are fluent in Spanish, Deutsch, we have assessors that went through our process to qualify them as assessors. And they live in other countries and they master those languages. Okay, we have specific for Mexico, we have assessors that live there and technical assessor as well.
And the next question is, will the accreditation requirements change as the laws change federally or locally?
Yeah, what's happened is when one accreditation, as Turon mentioned, I mentioned that as well, that we use those regulations. When those regulations change, it's a standard that those regulatory bodies is going to give a time frame for that regulation to start to be enforced, that regulation. So, and then all the parts involved is going to have a time to incorporate or revise, incorporate new requirements or revise the existing requirements that they have internally in their documents. And sometimes when there are too many revision of the requirements, and then there is a need to change much more the documents, people need to be trained again. And this process is part of the accreditation, because we are not going to require that the cabs needs to implement that standard, that new standard immediately. It's going to have a time frame for you to what we call transition period for the certification bodies or the cabs to incorporate those requirements in their process or train people. It's a variable. It's many things can be changed in regulations, and then because of that, things going to happen in the on the organizations that we accredit. I think Keith got back, Melanie, as you can see.
Yes, he's back here. So Keith, if you want to add anything to my response about what parameters are the most important, basically focused on the regulatory requirements, you can go ahead and let us know. I think he's having some internet issues today. So there's just one more question that I have in the Q&A. Hi, Keith.
Hello. Yeah, I apologize. My internet is kicking on and off all afternoon.
It happens.
Yep. So, catch me up on the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the question was, let me get back to it. What parameters are the most important for cannabis labs and dispensaries? For example, chemical content or physical properties like weights and measures. So I said regulatory requirements, and then thinking about safety and risk.
Yeah, it really is more on the testing of the compounds in the product. You know, we're looking with accreditation of a laboratory on several issues. You know, the first is that the product is safe to use by the end user, right? That there's not going to be inconsequential health hazards associated with the use of that material. And then also, the attestation of the accreditation by looking at the quality and management system of the laboratory that operates in compliance to the 17025 standard, and then the competence of their testing. When we go on site to do an assessment, that we're looking at the competence of the technicians performing the analysis, their training records, the protocols that they use. Are they robust? Are they verified and validated, for the matrix type that they're testing? How the laboratory, verifies the validity of that test result. So that's really the criteria that we're looking at through an accreditation process. And on the testing side, that's, the list that we talked about at the beginning, the cannabinoids, potency, terpenes, pesticides, micro and metals.
Great, thank you for answering that. Then we have a question, says, I am a PMO on software projects. Do I have to have any special background for the accreditation? Are you if you could add to the chat or add another question, for which accreditation are you talking about? And then I will speak to a question that's in the chat. Someone asked, how do they become an auditor or an assessor for ANAB? If you send an email to anab@anab.org, we can give you the information about that project or that process. So 17025 accreditation for software projects. Are there any special background needed for accreditation? No? Okay, hold on. We're getting clarification. Well, while we get clarification on that question, we are winding down on time. I appreciate and thank our panelists for joining us today and for the questions that you all asked in the chat and in our Q&A here. I just want to go over some additional resources that we have available for you. ANAB offers free webcasts on our website. They're on a variety of different topics. They're between 5 and 25 minutes apiece, and you can access them at any time. If there's a topic that you're interested in and we don't have it, then shoot us an email and it's one that we can add to our list. We do these webinars monthly, and so we just change up our topics every month. This month we were on accreditation. Last month, I think it was on corrective action. We also have a blog that's full of a wealth of information on a variety of topics that are accreditation standard related, but we also do related topics such as like laboratory safety. We just had a guest contribution for laboratory safety. But we do have a lot of blog posts about the cannabis industry and the different accreditation programs that we offer. And then again, we offer training. We talked about that before. So I will leave just some general contact information for you here. If you have any additional questions about training, you can email training@anab.org. And additional information about the webinar today, or if you want the contact information for our panelists, you can email anab@anab.org, and we will get back to you for that. So I'm sorry, I'm looking at the Q&A to get the clarification of that question. So they want to know if accreditation for 17025 is for lab professionals or medical professionals.
That is Melanie, that's a different conformity assessment process. That is certification of people or persons.
That's what I was thinking. That was not going to be, that's not 17025. 17025 is specific for laboratories, the laboratory itself that's performing the testing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and for people, it's 17024 is the international standard that we accredit CVs that certified people, like for cybersecurity technicians, experts. We already accredit certification bodies for that. They certify people like cybersecurity experts. It's one example, but we have many.
Okay. Great. If you still have wants more information about that, the individual that's asking those questions, you can email that ANAB@anab.org, and we will get you to the right person to give you additional information. So with that, I'm not seeing any other questions. I want to thank everyone for attending today. And again, I want to thank our panelists for attending and answering the questions that we had. I know I learned some more information about our programs today just listening to your descriptions. We did record this webinar and it will be available on our website for future viewing. Give it about 5 days just so the recording can process and we can get it up on our website. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie.
Thank you.